Good evening. Welcome to Reimagining Monuments, a conversation among artists. I am Lauren Campbell, the Director of Education at Strathmore, and I'm delighted to host this conversation with the incredible artists that we have with us tonight. Like I said, we have over almost 150 folks signed up to attend tonight, and so I'm just honored to be able to hold this space and this conversation with all of you. Of course, the conversation is in association with our outdoor exhibition, currently at Strathmore by Craig Walsh, Monuments, Creative Forces. And Sarah, will you go ahead and launch the attendance poll? We're gonna do a little poll just to ask you if you've been to Monuments yet, if you've seen it. And while we are getting those results, I'm happy to announce that instead of closing on October 25th, Monuments will be extended through Halloween. So we just made that decision today. The extra spots will be open starting this Thursday. So keep your eye out. And if you weren't able to get a time slot that you wanted, take a look. We'll be open from Tuesday the 27th through Halloween the 31st. And we got about half and half. 48% yes, 52% no. So I hope that that 52% can get a spot this week or next week as soon as those new spots are available. A few operational details on how this will work. The formal program will run until 8:15, and then at 8:15 for 15 minutes, if you'd like to stay, the panel will all stay and we'll have a little more informal conversation and some more questions. We do have 10 minutes for Q&A towards the end of the formal portion around 8 o'clock, and you'll be able to submit Q&A through the Q&A module at the bottom of your screen or in the chat. And the chat will be closed otherwise. And Sarah Farmer, Strathmore's Director of Programming, is here with us as our terrific tech support and production support. So thank you, Sarah. Now, I'd like to welcome one of the artists featured in Monuments. Because our time tonight is short and we're covering a lot of ground, I'm going to trust you to read all about Marjan Naderi on our website or on her website. Marjan is at 18 years old, the 2020 DC Youth Poet Laureate. She is a Muslim Afghan American author, performer, and educator. Feeling outcast as a minority in America and yet somehow too American to be accepted by the Afghan community, Naderi's poetry reconciles her family's roots with that of her American upbringing. In so doing, she has forged a path for healing and understanding. She is also one of the faces on the trees right now on the Strathmore campus. So she will open our session with a poem. Welcome, Marjan.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today on this beautiful Monday afternoon. This poem that I want to open for you all is entitled Fallen Heroes, but mainly in the conversation of time, in the conversation of autumn and trees continuously changing and evolving, but more specifically, life and how we are truly only born and here and alive for such a short glimmer of time. And I would say that that's really in the womb, where we feel our truest contentment and peace and full attachment. And as we navigate through this life, we're attempting to fill that gap with things that we love, like art and with people. But the end always comes, and this is the cycle of life. And so this piece is inspired on that conversation. Autumn dresses in magnificence to meet the Creator, fall by his command. The stem breaks, decaying skeletons of brown and gray, webs intertwining, chipping away. And when some morning comes, they have all cleared, and no one knows where they've gone. The cycle always repeats, and we will always watch, and no one says a thing when death is resting beneath our heels. Word. I'll pass it back over to you, Lauren.
Thank you so much, Marjan. That was beautiful, beautiful opening. And those of you who've been to the exhibit know that the leaves on the faces are even changing color already. So that's really the feeling that we have on campus right now, is that change. I encourage you all to check out Marjan's work. She has a lot of work and a lot of beautiful poems out in the world to read, including a book. So please do take a look and follow her, because we'll want to follow her as she grows into her career. And we'll hear from her again at the end with another poem she'll close. So Sarah, would you mind launching the next poll? We'll just do another one. This is a little bit more of a meaty question for folks. And while you're answering, I am thrilled to welcome Ada Pinkston. Pinkston is an artist, educator, and cultural organizer living and working in Baltimore, Maryland, where she is a lecturer in art education at Towson University. Her work explores the intersection of imagined histories and socio-political realities on our bodies using performance, digital media, and mixed media, sculptures, and installations. We will start tonight with Ada sharing about her own work in the monuments realm, and then we'll invite Craig Walsh to join her in a few moments, and then we'll add in the rest of the panelists. The results of the poll, this is a little different from the last one. 94% say yes, it is necessary to make new monuments. Thank you for answering that.
Hello, greetings, salutations, everyone. I wanted to say thank you to Lauren for the invitation and thank you to Strathmore for hosting this conversation. And the fact that 94% of you or 90% of you feel like there's a need for new monuments is really good to hear. So let me open up a little bit to talk about my work. I'm a mixed media artist. I make work to wake us up to face our time and recognize the imaginary of whiteness, the invisibility of intersectional oppression, the visibility of the constructs of power and race, and the material realities of class. Through my work, I'm interested in rewriting canonical accounts of history through collaborative works, digital media, and immersive installations. In this talk, we are going to examine the concept and the framing of the term monuments in our contemporary landscape. And I just want to preface this talk to say that I'm an artist, I'm not a historian, and most of my research is done through conversations with people in real time, and my primary sources are found mostly online and through library archives, but the majority of the work and research that I do is out in the world. So when you do a Google image search, these are the images that come up when you look for the term public space. And when you do a Google image search of the word monument, these are the images that come up. And these Google image searches are a reflection of our collective consciousness, if you will. But it's interesting to consider in the context of this, the history of the story of the monument. We have stone, bronze, plaster, marble, cement, steel. Monuments are places and spaces that carry significant weight to the social architecture of a place. They are oftentimes large and foreboding, overlooking the spectator with eyes of reverence. The spectator is overcome, completely surrounded and encapsulated by the form that is the monument. That's only if people actually stop to look at it. But what is the definition of this word? According to Merriam-Webster, it is obsolete, a burial vault, a written legal document or record, a treatise, a lasting evidence, reminder, or example of someone or something notable or great, a distinguished person, a memorial stone or a building erected in remembrance of a person or event, archaic. It is an identifying mark, it is evidence, also portent, sign, obsolete. It is an effigy, a boundary or position, a marker, such as a stone. It is a national monument or a written tribute. So as we can see from this shifting nature of the definition of the word monument, the monument is an object and form that changes according to time, place, social, economic, and political perspectives. Some monuments have been stolen or acquired through questionable means. Other monuments maintain their reverence and scale in the public sphere, despite the fact that they are subjects of acrimonious debate. And of course, there are always outliers. Craig Walsh's interventions are an example of such. He uses digital technology to memorialize contemporary citizens and to recontextualize contested histories. These 3D renderings of portraits are an aesthetic breath of fresh air. The form of these monumental portraits are in direct opposition to the textbook definition of the term monument. And yet they are monumental forms. For decades, he has created site-specific works that interrogate the form of the monument. His work both reconfigures and reimagines the formal definition of the landscape of architecture and uses technology to merge and blur these boundaries. His earlier investigation of the monument in public space, called Human Nature, was installed in between the years of 1994 and 2008 around the world. It was installed in Japan, Australia, Cuba, the UK, and Singapore. I'm just going to read a bit from the artist's website as we see some documentation of some of those beautiful installations. Human Nature was a site-specific project which transformed plants and trees by day into monumental sculptures by night. This illusion was produced through slide or video projection of computer manipulated portraits, pre-recorded video or live video feeds of actors onto trees, which have a similar 3D form as the human head. The outcome of this process was monumental heads glowing in the darkness, often perceived by the audience as giant hologram or an elaborate form of topiary. In the case of live video feeds, the audience freely conversed with the tree in a real-time interactive event. His work called Intention, installed in 2011 in Tasmania, addresses the bronze statue of Sir John Franklin, governor of Tasmania from 1836 to 1843. So again, I'm gonna read a bit from the artist's website. Franklin is remembered as sympathetic and well-meaning. It is not widely known that he and his wife, Lady Jane Franklin, adopted Mathena, a 6-year-old Aboriginal girl from Flinders Island. She lived with them in Government House in Franklin Square for 2 years, but when they returned to England, they abandoned her in an orphanage. She never recovered a sense of place in either world and died at age 17. This work involves an animated projection of Lady Jane Franklin onto the sculpture's stone plinth. She appears captive and struggling to support the statue of her husband. Her face is also projected onto a nearby tree. At a distance, another tree bears a projection of Mathena's face. Quietly. This work creates a counter narrative to the narrative that we know of the male figure on the plank. At a distance, another tree bears this interplay between the husband and wife. So it's a catalyst of what a monument could be. And it's also a consideration of how to explore histories in relationship to the time and space and current recontextualization of the past, of stories from the past. Emergence, installed at Hyde Park in Sydney, Australia, another beautiful rendering within trees. So he is very much interested in how to recontextualize a landscape, taking the form, the human form of the human, or the face of the human, and reconsidering how to move beyond the traditional format of a formal permanent sculpture, but it still tells this story. And with that, there's a lot more that I can go over, but I wanted to include Craig as I'm going through the slides of his work. So Craig I'm gonna keep playing these, and I'm gonna ask you questions as I'm going through them. You know what? I can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Ta-da. Great, thank you. Thank you for the lovely introduction. It was a really considered summary of my practice, so thank you.
You're welcome. I mean, your work is amazing, so we wanted to make sure that we gave it the right amount of reverence that it deserved and required, right? So can you talk a little bit about how you developed these projects, or the first iteration of your interrogation of a landscape and monument? What was the source?
Sure, it's been a long journey really with this work. You know, as an artist, you sort of develop and experiment and create different types of work. And this is one that's continued to have presence over, nearly 25 years now, and it's evolved, etc. But I think, from my point of view, it runs right back to when I was studying art, and I was doing, a double major in sculpture and new media, which is what it was called in those days. And I started to experiment with the moving image and light onto three-dimensional forms and paintings. I was creating paintings and projecting onto paintings. And I was really experimenting and seeing this idea that, the image created digitally is determined through the surfaces that it occupies. So how this project actually happened was that I had these black and white slide portraits that I was projecting onto paintings and sort of painting and responding to the projected light. And I had this opportunity to go to a festival. They asked me to do a work, and I took these slides with a slide projector and a generator, and I put it all on the back of a utility truck. And it was a wilderness site really for this festival. So there's lots of trees and lots of foliage. And we simply drove around the site projecting these portraits. And to be honest, for probably about 3/4 of the night, it didn't really work. It looked quite flat, and it looked, just a projected image onto the foliage, but it just happened to scan across a tree that was exactly the same scale as the portrait. And as you've seen, anyone who's experienced the work now, it becomes a complete synchronicity with the tree itself. It's not even really perceived, especially in the early days, it wasn't perceived as video projection because video projection wasn't very familiar for the public. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of how it started. And I think for me, it's really been this sort of investigation of how you intervene into public spaces. Rather than creating the object to occupy the space, how can we look at the existing space and change the meaning for the public? How can we get them to reevaluate the spaces and environments that really influence their condition? And projection became a medium that I found had new possibilities sculpturally, really. And so, I explored through my other works, I also explored the interaction with architecture, rivers, mountains, and that led to a very solid sort of site-specific, site-responsive practice. And most of my works, even to this day, are made for one place, and it's about the experience. It's, I guess I was always concerned between, the idea of art as experience and art as commodity and object. And, obviously projection became this opportunity to create a spatial experience and be able to respond to an environment in a way that, objects couldn't. And also be able to draw meaning in a way that objects couldn't, or not as limited as the sort of, quite defined history that you might see a monument reflect. So that's sort of the origins of it. And I guess it's very exciting for me to be able to experiment, with this medium at a time when this medium hadn't really been explored, especially in outdoor environments. So there was this feeling of engaging in something new. And then, of course, as my practice developed, the people who occupy these spaces become paramount in defining what a work is. So I guess the evolution of this project, and now that it's titled Monuments, is about a holistic sort of response to a specific environment, but having this opportunity to invite local content. Local content actually defines the work. So I'm almost a facilitator to give voice to that specific community in place. So beyond its formal qualities, I find great benefit in continuing this project and being able to engage and give this opportunity to communities to reflect and think about their environment, but think about those people who help define what that environment is beyond, the politicized objects that generally occupy our public space. All these projects you're showing now are different types of applications. These works on the rock face. This is up in the Pilbara in northern Australia, in a very remote area, but also a mining area. So if you look at these images, these are elders from this region, who have a 40,000 year lineage to these rock formations. Mm-hmm. But and in this one area, there's over 1 million documented hieroglyphs. People have been drawing on rocks for over 40,000 years in this space. But the irony is that in amongst this is, of course, mining. So you've got this sort of stark contrast of dislocated landscape, as you can, literally see it disappearing on the horizon, as opposed to this Indigenous and First Nation people's, history. And they when they try to define what this landscape means to them, the closest they can get to, finding something which we might understand is their Bible. Mm. So law, custom, everything is defined and runs through this landscape. So this is an example of a project where I work very closely with a community. There's a whole lot of protocols that need to be respected and defined. Individuals who can be shown in a specific place. But at the end of the day, this is a very empowering image for Aboriginal people, because it clearly defines that relationship to landscape and how landscape defines their culture and has defined their culture. Mm-hmm. So, this process of utilizing projection, and of course I'm not really disturbing that natural environment as well. It's not like I'm, the days of Richard Long, etc., where you might move all the rocks into a linear space or spiral jetty, etc., where, you might argue that there's this permanent sort of intervention. This is purely for a time and place, and there's minimal impact on the environment itself.
Mm-hmm. Collaboration seems to be another key piece or key element of all of your work. Would you consider yourself a community artist or a socially engaged artist, or is this a word or form that you would like to not be associated with?
Look, I think all titles for artists are loaded with a whole lot of content that artists find hard to accept, because we don't like to be defined specifically to be bracketed. But most definitely, as I said, I think true to the nature of creating site responsive works is that the community are a big part of that space. It's not just the physical landscape or city or urban scape, or it's the people who use that space. And I think a lot of my work, and the reason I started working in public space, was I recognized this opportunity that the creator, as an artist, you can affect an audience, rid of the baggage that goes with the tradition of art. Quite often these works don't have titles. A lot of people wandering in public space aren't aware of the promotion and marketing that goes around a lot of these projects. So I actually like that opportunity that we can have a sort of almost a pure experience with creativity, rid of the baggage of art, which historically provides sort of limitations and definitions for an audience as to how they might interact with it. So all those things are part of my practice and my thinking around this being a valid way to create work. But I also think what I've learned over the projects I've done is that it is local people who understand the place, and know the stories and know what's important to the place. So, I don't suppose as an artist that I know more than the people who actually occupy these spaces. And it's of a huge benefit to me to bring them into the project and provide a voice and allow this opportunity for them to express what's important to them about this place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say from the onset that your work has been pushing boundaries. And I think that this approach is very radical even today, right? And that is quite unique, right? Even to think about how from 94 to the present day, this work is still radical. So I wonder, how do you, like, for instance, with this installation, what steps did you take to interrogate the land? And how did you come up with the ways in which the group of artists were kind of like democratically elected, if you will, to be a part of this install?
I think, well, it's interesting because, I was doing so many projects, and those projects, as I said, were based around very specific communities, and it might have, some of those works may be tree projections, but, I've been involved with sort of creating mythologies or developing new mythologies for public spaces, which might occupy the waterways of a public space. So it's really, I have this sort of arsenal of applications in which we can explore, to express the concepts that arrive from the conversation with the community. But what I found was that, we're constantly searching for new titles for this work in every location. As you outlined, I've presented this work a lot. And I wanted to sort of, I wanted to define it under one title, because I think it's really interesting to have that dialogue between works, and how different communities, the priorities they place on defining who should be, have this short time presence as, taking on this traditional notion of a monument. So I think, I'm hoping that there's this huge archive in which, we can look at the comparisons and see, you start identifying what are the key elements and what are the key things that are important to a community, and expressing that. So I generally, I'm in conversation with whoever the host is for the project. But I do leave it quite open. I think I've been able to define the project conceptually in a way that there is this openness for suggestions as to what would be best in that community about who should be defined and who should be the people who. I mean, that's always flawed because we're making this decision of, 5 or 6 people or 3 people out of a whole community, right? But this is sort of the beauty of a temporal work, is that, well, that's fine. We're just talking about this history at this time. There should be lots of opportunities in the future for other histories and other people to be represented in these spaces. So, and I think, monuments is a really, it sort of defines, as you outlined, I'm able to draw on the tradition of the monument, with the idea of the scale and the human form. But I'm able to, in contrast to that, it's ephemeral. It's as much, when you look at these works, it's as much the tree as it is the individuals who are projected on them. So, I'm able to sort of think about, well, the tree in itself is a monument. We're definitely drawn to the portrait, but if you look at it, the largest percentage of that image is actually the tree, more than the face. So, and I think that's important. And as you outlined also is, I'm really interested in, making much more complex and diverse references to histories of a space than what can possibly be represented in a permanent monument. And I think this underlines the issue is that, a permanent monument is of a time and a place, but there's somehow this expectation that it should remain valid for eternity. And, we don't even see much architecture that can do that. So I don't think, the idea that a monument to an individual would stand the test of time is right as well. But, yeah, so that's sort of, the way of defining this is monuments. And also it sort of does make that reference to the importance of something or someone who has contributed. And what I'm doing is I'm redefining what contribution that can be, as opposed to a politicized or, military type perspective and a very selective history. I'm trying to broaden that so that we understand that, a space is defined by many people's contribution. And, I've done this work before where I've honored the groundsman who mows the lawn and looks after the tree, and I think that's as valid, in its own way as anything else. So yeah, that's the objective.
Yeah, I was actually very impressed with the public space maker series that you had. I also wanted to just name all of the people that all of the local DMV audience can see if they go to the Strathmore this October. You'll see the amazing faces of local artists, including B. Steadwell, Daryl Davis, Teron Cooper, Sorrells, Marjan, Naderi, C. Brian Williams, and Yoko K. Sen. And here are two examples of what the work looked like, or what the photographs looked like before they were 3D rendered. And then here's what it is once it's 3D rendered. So with that, we have two of the local artists that were monumentalized through this work. And they are going to talk with us today. The first person I'm going to introduce is C. Brian Williams. He is the founder and executive director of STEP Africa. He's a native of Houston, Texas, and graduate of Howard University. He first learned to step as a member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. And while living in Southern Africa, he began to research the percussive dance tradition of stepping. And if you want to find out more about the work that he's done with stepping, you can go to stepafrica.org. The next person is Daryl Davis. Daryl Davis is an international recording artist, actor, and leader of the Daryl Davis Band. He is considered to be one of the greatest blues and boogie woogie and blues and rock and roll pianists of all time, while playing with the legendary blues band, formerly the Muddy Waters Band, and Chuck Berry. And you can find out about all of the amazing work that he does on daryldavis.com. I'm going to put their websites in the chats. And they both are scholars and writers. And I'm really looking forward to have this conversation with them. So with that, for Brian and Daryl, how does it feel to see yourself as a monument? And yeah, we can just start there.
Well, I'll go first. First, thanks to you guys for gathering, and to everybody out there. Thank you to the Strathmore, Joy Brown, her entire team, for creating a space for us to still gather. I mean, Strathmore and artists like Daryl and the artists that are part of Monuments and Craig Walsh, we specialize in creating places where we can gather, right? So this has been a challenge for our world, but it's nice that artists and arts organizations are still trying to create in this moment. So for me, really quickly, it was humbling, to be a part, to be invited. STEP Africa, I've been leading STEP Africa for over 25 years. I started it when I'm not even gonna age myself, but it was a long time ago. But it was nice for Strathmore to choose artists in our area who've been doing this work for a long time. But it's also humbling, recognizing that there's so many artists that and faces and people that we need to support. So to me, it was kind of like a reminder that we need to do more to lift up those in our community. And there's so many, as much as we can.
Mm-hmm. And Daryl, how about you?
Oh, I agree 100% with Brian there. It is very, very humbling, and I'm extremely honored. I was totally caught off guard and surprised when I was contacted by the Strathmore to be presented with this great monumental, if you will, honor. And I thank the Strathmore and Craig Walsh for all the work he's done, and everybody who's put this together. And congratulations to Brian and B. Steadwell and Terrence Sorrells and Yoko Sen, and everybody who's come together for this. You know, the important thing for me, there are several things, because, you know, generally we don't see monuments to people until after they're gone, all too often. And in this particular case, especially with minorities, we are being honored, you know, in person, you know, while we're still here, which is great. You know, monuments generally are an honor to somebody of significance, and for other people who come later on to look up to and aspire to achieve some of the things the people monumentalized have done as kind of a role model. I think it's fantastic that these honors are being presented to people while they are still with us, and people can remember them, you know, later on. It's also important to me that in an era right now where monuments of shame and oppression are being taken down, monuments of hope and giving things to all people, which is what artists do. We want to share our music, our art, our dance, you know, our creations with people, with everybody, regardless of religion, race, ethnicities, socioeconomic status, or background, that these monuments are being erected. And they stand taller and higher than any Confederate monument I've seen. So thank you all very much for that.
That's actually a good segue for a question I was going to ask Craig. So globally, there's this movement around anti-fascism, right? So we saw colonial figures being toppled in Western Europe, in the United States. Where do you think Australia, how is Australia in this conversation?
It's been happening here as well. You know, defacing of monuments has been happening here. So it's very much at the forefront of the conversation at the moment. You know, I think we're at a point, globally that it would be very hard to accept a sculptural form of an individual on a plinth anywhere as a new work. And in fact, interestingly, you know, in 2014, I was commissioned to do a permanent work to a governor of New South Wales, and that project got held up, and we're just revisiting it now. And the project is sculptural and projection, and my sculpture was the plinth disappearing into the landscape, sort of slowly sinking into the landscape, and the sculptural form as a bronze was off the plinth and sort of contemplating and lost in another place. We presented that to the local Durug Indigenous community here last week, and it didn't matter what form or the sort of, you know, the way that I was intervening with the notion of a traditional monument and actually displacing it and letting colonialism sink into the landscape. The fact that it was a colonial figure and it was a monument made it completely unacceptable. So it's not even a dialogue around manipulation of those forms. I think those forms just cannot exist in the landscape anymore. I'm in two minds for that, because some of the most interesting work I've seen in response to this is the simple changing of the didactic, the plaque on the sculpture. Let's make the references on, if you change the references on the sculpture to the actual history that takes place, then that sculpture and that monument takes on a completely different meaning. And it's about making solid reference to the issues around that. So they can act as a reminder to understand the mistakes that have been made as well. So yeah, but Australia is, I think it's a global movement. I think there's been too many First Nation communities or migrant communities minority communities that have been affected, or there's trauma associated with these forms.
So what do monuments, so I hear that, right? So there's trauma that's associated with the object, right? The form of the object. And when you mentioned this proposal for a plinth that falls into the ground, it reminded me of the work of Esther Schelles-Gertz, the Monument Against Fascism, that was installed in 1986 in Austria, right? And it's interesting because even though this monument that was installed or erected and then put down to the ground, because they're like, after 1986, there's no need for any monument that doesn't that kind of rejects fascism because there'll be no more fascists. Here we are in 2020, and there's this upsurge of this ideology, right? And when it comes to this, to the didactic situation that you're mentioning that comes up with these objects, I wonder if there, I wonder how, if there is really a need for it. Is there a need for the monument at this moment, right? And I think there's something that's so beautiful about your work is the ephemeral nature of it, right? It's just it's an ephemeral moment. People have the experience and then it's gone. Brian, do you think that there's a need for a monument, for new monuments to be formed?
Well, look, no.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I think that I'm looking forward to new monuments. I wonder if we've let go of the time where we need to have monuments to people. Maybe we need monuments to concepts and ideals. I think, I've traveled all over the world. When you're in Africa, on the continent of Africa, there's this move to create monuments for leaders who ended colonialism. And sometimes these leaders represent ideals, freedom from oppression. And so, and every society, every culture around the world seeks to raise up its heroes. I think that what's starting to happen is we're moving into a moment to where, do we really want to monumentalize people, or do we want to represent ideals that all of us can connect to? I think the challenge in America is that the story, the narrative of who is turned into a monument, it's just been too limiting. And it hasn't really embraced the true diversity and story of the country. So now when you see this backlash against monuments is because the stories haven't really been vetted fully, or now we're starting to see other sides of the story that weren't considered when the monument was made. So as we move forward as a culture, as a society, I think it'll be interesting how we choose to represent our collective ideals.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that we're having this conversation because I actually think that music and dance are themselves monumental forms, or they can be the embodiments of a time, right? Because the monument is basically an archive, right? So how would you say that the work that you do in dance, or Daryl, the work that you do in music, do you look at it as a monumental praxis? Or do you see the work of some musicians from like the past as monumental? Or when you listen to music from 100 years ago or 50 years ago, do you have this monumental experience?
Well, I certainly do personally, because I've played with people who created music from 50 years ago, and that music is still around today, and it will be around forever. And in fact, some of it was even sent out into space for all eternity in Voyager 2 by Carl Sagan, when he put together all the artifacts from Earth for the time capsule. So yes, music transcends color, religion, race, all kinds of social barriers. And so, yes, in that sense, it is monumental. And for me, I think, monuments to people who create ideas or concepts or different things, that are given to other people and anybody. I think, they should be honored, because I remember when I was a kid, I traveled the world. I lived in Africa for 10 years. I lived in Europe. I've been to 6 of our 7 continents. And my parents would always take me to museums or touring the cities and things like that. And now as an adult, I do the same thing as a musician playing around the world. I visit different things, when I'm in the country for more than one night to play. Mm-hmm. I try to see as much as I can. And when I see somebody who is, immortalized in a monument or something, and I read that plaque about what this person had done, and it piques my interest, then I'm back home on my computer looking this person up and finding out more about this person. And if this person interests me, then I'm inspired. I'm inspired to follow suit and perhaps try to emulate some of these things that somebody has done because I like the concept that this person came up with. So, to me, it's very important. It's like a museum. It's a body of history, and the monument is just simply a calling card. And then you become interested in that person, and then you go and research them, or you become interested in that building or that headstone, that plaque, whatever the monument may be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Craig's concept here, I think it will catch on in the future, where we may not have these permanent monuments, but like the Strathmore is doing, they're honoring 6 people for a certain period of time, and then perhaps the following month or whatever, it may be another 6 people from some other area, but these people are being monumentalized, if you will, and people can come and learn about that. So that is in itself an honor, and it's a lot more, I think, educational and accessible than have all these permanent things, because eventually you're going to run out of room. Mm-hmm. So this idea that Craig has that is mobile, where it's always revolving, different people for X amount of time and somebody else, etc., I think is phenomenal.
Brian, did you want to add to that, or Craig, did you want to add to that? Because I thought Daryl brought up a good point, which is the monument as a calling card. This is an interesting concept to consider. Are you guys, when was the last time you looked at a monument?
I see them all the time.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I do too, actually, for a range of reasons, really. But I think the fundamental problem with monument is what it signifies. And I think it signifies something of permanence. Mm-hmm. I think it does that. And I think we've moved past that, because you've got to think about the times when these were generated and maybe did have a place where we didn't have documentation. Like, we could argue that, the work that's gone on in Strathmore will live on for a very long time because of the way the multiple, the mass documentation of it and how it will be represented internationally. It's pretty, it's going to have more exposure than a statue did, 150 years ago. So I think that's really important to consider as well, is that, these histories and the stories and the subtext, say, to an artwork, has this opportunity, as Daryl said, to continue that dialogue and present many histories, and give the audience the opportunity to access what they are interested in. So I think that's important, this idea between the permanence and temporal. I think the idea that you can create something, or which is expected to last in eternity, in a changing world, is flawed from the start. And I think we need to think about that with all our public spaces, and even the way for artists, the way we engage and the purpose in our practice. We need to be, reconsidering that all the time, because the world is changing so quickly that we need to reflect that or be responsive to that.
Mm-hmm. And I think, monuments are definitely inspiring, just as certain people are. How many people have gone to say the Louvre Museum and seen the Mona Lisa, and that inspired them to become an artist, themselves, or then they've gone back home and read about, Leonardo da Vinci, and next thing you know, they have a whole wealth of new information just from having seen that image. And now, we're seeing an image in a tree, and somebody might be inspired to go, look up, see Brian Williams and find out what he's all about, and then become interested in that dance, and so forth and so on. So, mm-hmm. These things, can have a lot of positive effect.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to play a little bit of the video from the install that is currently up at the Strathmore, because I don't really think that the photos really do it justice. Because you can kind of see, like, the person kind of becomes alive in the tree, which is very it's very beautiful. It's a very there's this poetic moment that's happening between the portrait, the 3D portrait, and the landscape.
And I think, it's the environmental influences. I really like the fact that as an artist, the form of the tree, in this case, you're seeing a wind effect. And at times we've done it where there's been colonies of bats occupying the tree. So you have this sort of additional activity with nature interacting with it that, as an artist, it's random. You don't have control over that. And I think that's one of the things about working in the outdoors and working with the natural environment that we need to take on board and just run with, as opposed to, having a sculpture there that you have to keep clean all the time because, the birds are on it and whatever. Let that go, let that interaction and everything that symbolizes between what we make as art and the environment it exists in play its part and become part of the work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm gonna ask one more question, and then I think I want to open it up to the audience questions so that we have enough time to answer all of them. I mean, Craig, your work is basically an embodiment of this, but my question for all of you is what will monuments look like in the future?
I'll start. I think it's going to be very interesting how we decide to make monuments going forward. I think that the country and the world is going through this revolution in terms of how we honor, and do we honor people or do we honor ideals and concepts that we can all connect to? I mean, our world is more connected than it was in the days when the monuments that we see today were created, especially those mostly in America to men from a certain period. Now our society can finally see value and lift up the voices of so many other people. So how we choose and what we choose to memorialize, I think will be really, for a collective space, for shared public space, will be interesting, which is why I'm more interested in us finding common ideals that we want to celebrate and how do we best represent those. So I think it's a fascinating challenge and I'm looking forward to that, making sure that we're able to represent by the collective in a way that it hasn't been done before. Historically, it's really been focused on one culture story, one community story. How do our monuments really represent this new world that we're entering?
Daryl, you kind of already answered this question a little bit in some of the things you said before. Do you think that that monuments as a architectural form or a monument as archive, do you think that this is something that we can continue? Like, do you think that there's a future, right? Do you think there's more possibilities behind instead of what we already have existing?
Yes, I think, exactly what I said, that the concept that Craig has for projecting these images onto surfaces, trees or otherwise, I think that will be the wave of the future eventually. And I'm hoping that it will, because it can be a rotating thing where, where more people can be featured in monuments. How long does it take to build a statue? Years, things like that. And the people behind the concepts, I think, is important to acknowledge. For example, you take the non-violence approach to protest of Dr. Martin Luther King. Certainly, the concept is fantastic, but we need to give credit to the man who came up with the idea and who created that movement, that non-violent movement as well. So, projecting these things on our surfaces, I think is a wonderful idea, and they can last for any period of time, so people can come see that particular exhibit if that's what they're into, and then next month it might be a totally different exhibit on some other concepts, whatever. So it's always revolving, and people will be getting more and more educated by this a lot quicker than erecting things that takes years to build and put in place.
So when you're talking about education, it made me think of the Thomas Hirshhorn monuments that were erected. He has a series of monuments that are basically educational spaces for philosophers. But also when you mentioned MLK, it made me think about the ways in which the perception of who he was has evolved over time, because when he was alive, he was not as revered as he is now, right?
Right.
So I think that there is something that is very beautiful about the possibilities of having monuments that are constantly changing. And now I see Arlene wanted me to play this video again. I'm gonna play this video again, and I'm gonna ask the first question that's in the Q&A. So the first question is, because you seem to be emphasizing kinetic dynamic over static monuments, have you ever considered projecting onto flowing water so you have constant motion and change?
Yes, I've done quite a few projects with water, and it's a fascinating process because, once again, as I defined earlier, is this sort of randomness and the unexpected that comes from dealing with sort of, very, very active natural elements. One thing that I've done with water, which has been really a fascinating journey, is that we've been able to develop certain mythologies around species, based on a community. The community might have all these stories of the unknown, what lies below the water. And we've been able to recreate those in 3D and then project them back into those river systems. So they have this sort of virtually a permanent presence in a waterway or a community. And what's interesting about that is everything that evolves from that, the sense of ownership, the sense of uniqueness of a place, this sort of pride in having this unique species occupying a waterway, which links into quite often, First Nation mythologies, just stories that have circulated the community. So yes, and then, we've developed works where we're now taking sensors into waterways, which can measure the turbidity, the temperature, a whole range of actions, and then the organism that is projected in the water is reflective of the conditions of the river. So it becomes a barometer of the river, and the organism will actually change based on the conditions of the river. So yes, sorry, that was a long answer, but yes, I think I've experimented with most spaces with projection or other applications.
Great. The next question is from Rebecca. The question is, commemoration is a necessary component of monument making. Mr. Walsh said he was redefining what contribution means to avoid politicizing contributions. Is this how he intends to circumvent questions of commemoration? And is commemoration important to his works? And is it important to him that his spectators also infer the commemorative elements needed to label this work a new genre of monuments? Yeah.
I'm not anti-commemorative at all. I think, look, I think that's a really difficult question. I think I feel like we should have a range of responses to how we define moments in history or people in history, but also, as Daryl said, people who are contributing now. And I think there's actually place for all those things. And I actually would advocate that we explore them in different mediums and different ways. I think one of the risks we run with trying to define some sort of collective response to that history of monuments is that we can end up creating quite a sort of narrow view of what we think should happen into the future as well. So I think we need to find a way to allow concepts and issues that are important to people to manifest in different ways. And we want a diversity of views. I can't see the point if we're all aligned in the way that we perceive the world. I think for me personally, that would become rather uninteresting and unuseful, because unless we can respond to other people's actions, then we don't really have much to respond to. So I'm not really anti-traditional monuments, to be honest. I said my point is that we need to think about the time frame that they exist for, and we need to be able to think and be clever about how we might intervene into those to make them relative to the time. You know, I think.
You know, oh, sorry.
You're right. After you.
And you know, I think public space is, to me, quite sacred. You know, shared space, and how we make sure those spaces that we are all allowed to come together in, especially as the country moves forward. I mean, there are times where, you know, in America's history in particular, there are spaces that could not be shared by many people from the community. It was held apart. So now for me, public space is very, very sacred. So how we create those spaces and bring those spaces forward are really important. And I can't help but think about the issue behind the funding of monuments historically. You know, a lot of times monuments have been privately funded, and so then a very small group of people get to select who actually becomes memorialized. So how do we democratize that? I think about the monuments in Washington, D.C., which historically has been a largely African-American city for the last maybe 50, 60 years. But the funding behind the monuments has made them pale in comparison to better funded memorials and things. So how do you get, that enters the equation of how even the size and scale of the monuments that are created. So it's such a, and now I think as we move into this space, I really want us to be as inclusive as possible and make these choices to make sure our spaces are really welcoming to all. I think that's going to be important going forward. And I don't know, it's just an interesting question I wanted to throw out, or a statement I wanted to throw out there, turn us towards the future.
You know, I might add, and Craig, you know, you can certainly speak to this yourself, because I think the question was directed at you. But in Craig's defense, I feel the same way, you know, musically, and I know certain movie makers feel the same way when they make movies. There are certain artists who are passionate about something that they truly believe in, and they put it in their song, they put it in their films every time. You take, for example, some of the folk singers from the 1960s, like a Bob Dylan, or Joan Baez, or whatever. They were very politically motivated. They sing songs about the Vietnam War or anti-Vietnam War, what have you. Other artists, they stay away from those kinds of things because they have fans on both sides of the equation. And if they took one point of view, you know, they'd lose the other side or whatever. So they just, you know, are neutralized, and their music is just about whatever. Same thing with artists. You know, I don't think anybody has to be 100% commemorative or not. You know, the beauty is in the art that is being created, and then let the people judge from the artwork. For example, you take Stone Mountain, Georgia. You take Mount Rushmore. Mount Rushmore was carved by a member of the KKK. And it's a beautiful structure. Do I support the KKK? Absolutely not. But I look at that structure, I think, wow, you know, this is really amazing. So he may have done it for commemorative purposes, but he was commissioned to carve these people on that mountain. So, you know, we have to look at both sides of the coin and not put an obligation upon the artist to feel one way or another. We ask the artist to create something, and that's what they have done.
Yeah, and I'd add that, you know, artists, when we're creating this sort of work, are just adding to the conversation or stimulating the conversation. It's not about us coming up with a result, you know, finding the answer. What we have to do is just provide the provocation to let the conversation grow. And, you know, the beauty of these sort of temporal works is, and it's something I've always advocated as a stage in permanent works, is through temporal works, we can learn. You know, we learn how the audience responds to it. We learn about how we can apply different sort of content to public space that hasn't been able to occupy those spaces before. And, you know, that's a real beauty of, you know, I think if we think about it, rather than coming up with an end result, but we are contributing to the development, is a really positive way for artists to think. And, you know, hopefully it gives us priorities too as to how we are contributing to define the spaces and the environments which have such a huge influence on the human condition. And that's a great responsibility. And I think just the idea of permanence is just a permanent sculpture is just too much responsibility to service all the needs into time you know, all those different communities that might occupy that place. So, you know, I just wanted to add that this idea of temporal work should not just be, while it exists in its own art form, it can be the stimulus for understanding what some form of even an evolving permanent work might be into the future, you know.
And additionally, you know, these exhibits can travel, you know, all over the country. You know, people don't necessarily have to come from Los Angeles to see what's at the Strathmore. What's at the Strathmore can go be projected on trees in Los Angeles or something. So
Yeah.
you know, this whole, you know, it opens up so many more opportunities for more people to see and be inspired and learn and educate.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that the use of technology opens up a lot more possibilities for the realm of public space. But I also think the question of who has power within the field of architecture, right? This is something that has been, you know, investigated and contested by a lot of art historians and theorists in the present day. And I think that there is a move to include more women, for instance, in the field of architecture. But I also think it's something, as Brian said, this is something that we need to be conscious and consciously considering. And Craig, I think that your work, including communities in these temporal monuments, is really beautiful. And Kate Thomas asked a question about communities. And she said, what are the values, ideals, or qualities of individuals' communities that people want to monumentalize through the individuals they select to highlight in the portraits?
It's generally, I mean, it's always different, I think. And I think the concept is open enough that there seems to always be in any particular community something that's needed to be represented. So I think in this given time in Strathmore, it was really important to represent the artists, given what's going on at this time. I think for Joy and the people sort of I was communicating with about defining the individuals, that was seen as the priority and the important and a positive, something really positive about the community that could be given back to the community and sort of distract, I guess, from other things which are influencing people's lives. But we've done works, as I said, we've done works with sort of Indigenous elders who, you know, are linked to the landscape, concepts around political movements. You know, one of those works in Sydney in Hyde Park, I found people who had a long history of civic action in that park. And in that park are many monuments to colonization and, you know, for instance, the Vietnam War, etc. And we found individuals who had been constantly, since a young person, been going to that park and fighting for civil action. And we made monuments to those people and projected them up in Hyde Park, large scale. We also had a soundtrack with that, which was really beautiful. And I asked each one of them their favorite protest songs, which obviously, you know, included a Dylan song, etc. And we got a choir of whistlers to whistle those songs, and we played that back as a recording throughout the space as you experienced the tree projections as well. So it's really diverse. And as I said, you know, we made a single portrait monument in the center of Brisbane in the Botanic Gardens to the groundsman who looks after those gardens. Mm-hmm. So it's you know, I think it's, as I said earlier, I think it's really important that there's a sort of, I create an openness for that conversation with whatever community I go to, so we can actually identify what might be the most beneficial or relative at that time.
Mm-hmm. This question is for everyone. It's from Robert. The question is there not also value beyond the ephemeral experience that permanent markers lend themselves to? Is there not also value behind the ephemeral experience that permanent markers lend themselves to? I think Daryl was mentioning that a little bit.
I think that immediately brings to mind Nelson Mandela Square in Johannesburg, South Africa. You know, so you're looking at a country that was dealing with maybe 50 years under apartheid, with monuments, great monuments built that's apartheid, and the leaders and crafters of apartheid, and the majority of the country is having to walk around and be subjected to these monuments that don't represent them. So it was kind of interesting that once freedom came to South Africa, that their first choice was to build a gigantic monument of Nelson Mandela to represent the aspirations of the people. And I think so. It's very much a responsive moment to an old ideal coming forward. So one could say that his role, Nelson Mandela's role in South Africa in the transition from apartheid to a freedom and democracy, is a permanent experience that should be memorialized. I mean, I guess the question will be, and it definitely spoke to the people. So in that situation, I think that's kind of one way that an individual, a person's face can represent a significant transition from something, pivotal moment in American and world history or in a country's history. I'm curious what the others think about that.
I think, as I said, I think there's a place for it. I think what we're doing now, I think, is just readdressing a balance. I think by the instigation of temporal works and exploring new definitions of what a monument is should contribute to, we would hope, better permanent spaces or works, you know, because it forces us to redefine what that means. And so I still think there is a place. I think that's a great example where how are we to know how that will be perceived in 20, 30 years, 50 years time, right? That's always a question. So it comes back to this issue about how can you make something or define something for a community or a public that will retain meaning over a durational, long period of time. I mean, you can argue with temporal works, and I've been involved with a few where you do have a permanent space for projection, but the content continues to change. So it actually does have a permanent presence, but it has this opportunity to redefine the content over a period of time. And, you know, that's quite interesting in durational works, which can evolve and change over a 12-month period. There's lots of arguments around that, not only the content and how that retains a relativity, is that how that actually engages an audience over a period of time and allows artists to engage in concepts that you maybe can't express in any other way other than by it evolving over the narrative evolving over a 12-month period. So, you know, you could argue that is a permanent work. The fact that it changes and evolves is a relative in that ideal, I think, you know, and the fact you can only see it at night, etc. I think that still would define it as a permanent artwork. But the idea that through digital content we can make changes to that, or we can even have responses from the public, we can actually create algorithms in which that work continues to change based on the response from the public. You know, all these things feed into what I would hope, if we are going to make permanent, solid structures in our public spaces, they will be much more informed by the sort of experimentation and exploration that we're doing with the temporal works.
Okay, so there's two more questions. I know we're a little bit behind. I want to give these two people their voices. So Nancy asked one question, and it's one of my favorite monuments is Fearless Girl. It was originally commissioned for New York, but there are replicas around the world. I saw one Fearless Girl across from Parliament in Oslo, Norway. Do you feel Fearless Girl will survive through time? And we've kind of been talking about this, but do you feel that like this monument will survive through time?
I think it will survive through time. How it is displayed may change. It may go from you know, a marble structure or whatever into a projection or something else. But the idea, I think, will survive through time because, you know, women obviously are still struggling, you know, for their rights in this country, and Fearless Girl represents a lot of ideals for women.
Mm-hmm. And the last question is for Craig.
I love this question.
Yeah. If someone were to make a monument of you, how would you like to be represented? And where would you like for your monument to be? This is from Esther Sanchez.
Is that a question for me?
Yes.
Yes, man, it's for you.
Right. Look, that's a really difficult question because
I know.
you know I'm a sort of I'm pretty quiet. I like to stay in the background. You know, my work is never really representing me, and as I said, you know, quite a lot of these works, I'm trying to sort of have an engagement with an audience that we bypass those, you know, those sort of conventions around art. You know, the artist and you know the institution which you know defines the artist, etc. So, but look, you know, if I was going to do one. It would have to be a tree. I mean, I have looked at trees all over the planet and created portraits of people all over the planet on those trees. And, you know, I guess it would be the most honest reflection of a sort of, you know, it's been a work that I've been doing for 30 years and it would make sense that it would be on a tree. Where that tree would be the next question. But yeah, I think that would have to be the case.
All right, so with that, I'm going to close this section of the evening. I would like to reintroduce Marjan, who is going to come back and close with another beautiful poem. Marjan? Great. All right, and then after the poem, there's going to be an informal chat in this Zoom, so stay with us.
Word. Thank you all for the amazing discussion. Definitely very insightful. I did appreciate listening. This piece that I'm going to read for you all is entitled Learning My Name, and I think we'll offer a bow to closing the conversation. In first grade, I told kids my name was Sarah. Saw the way Sarah lifted the curtain, but never cleared the confusion of my first grade mustache, white enough for no one to ask questions. In second grade, my teacher did roll call every morning. I'd clench my fists as she'd sputter. John Adeary to the broken record of her eyebrows now. Every time my name is said, my bloodline folds scripts of history. So it sounds better in the job interview. Strips the vowels hidden in my voice, not fitting for the Western tongue. Marjan, Nadiri. Oh, so like the plant marjoram, like Parmesan, like the Chinese game Marjan, like the way my first white teacher said it. The way she corrected me in front of the classroom until I learned to strip parts of my identity the way she did. The best lessons she taught me were never in the syllabus. She never taught me what to say, rather, to bite down my tongue and watch heritage crumble to pieces beneath my jaw that she'd feed herself. She taught me to white out my name in the Farsi dictionary, reminded me, for the family tree to stop growing, you gotta rip it from its cultural roots, tear away from what was once growth. She planted my roots in stolen soil and called it America, said, you should have known another language here. Besides, what do you have to roll the R for? It's the only thing us white people can't do. When you forget where you're from, that's when you'll truly become American here. Learn to sing our song now. Forget the bloodline or your blood will be next in line for our red carpet. Roll out your history only to have us stampede. We'll turn the cultural dances into the 8-step masquerade. Must I remind you of the 7-day battle or the 6 seconds it took to love a language that will never learn your name? When I cry to my mother's feet about the people who will not accept me, she tells me, you have an identity translating to the coral. In the depth of heaven's rivers, your name is Marjan. You grow from the root word maraj. Flowing freely tells me, when you allow people to powder your name, the rest of your identity disintegrates along with it. The flags and people wave at the same things they have forgotten. Your grandfather did not immigrate halfway across the world for you to flatten your name to fit better in someone else's mouth. Remember, your hands hold the lifelines and the lifetimes of a lineage. If they ask your name, if you dare feel ashamed, seek every fighting fiber hidden in your warrior of a body. Remember, they cannot empty the bloodline of a fighter. So reload another stone into the slingshot that is your mouth. Reach out the palms of an engraved heritage and say, مرجان نادری. Word. I appreciate you all listening. This is a piece that I have written when I was 16, and it's carried close to my heart since. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Marjan. That was so beautiful. We're so happy to have you join us along with Craig and Brian and Daryl and Ada for the end of this. The formal portion has concluded, but we'd love to hang around for another 10 minutes or so. And if you'd like, you can raise your hand to unmute and we'll ask you to unmute if you want to make a comment or ask a question. I see Rebecca had a follow-up in the chat as well, but for all our attendees, go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to make a comment, and thank you for being here. Okay, Anne C. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Anne C. And you can go ahead and speak, Anne. And folks, if you'd like to weigh in the chat or add more questions, please feel free. Anne, do we have you? I don't know if we have Anne. We have lots of praise for Marjan in the chat. And of course, I want to say your name correctly now, which I don't think I was before. So thank you for that. We can roll R's. I have a comment from Rebecca. So Rebecca was the person who asked about commemoration. She says, I agree that artists are adding to the conversation, but shouldn't monuments be commemorative because monuments commemorate? So I don't know if there's any further remark on that. The question of, is there worth in commemoration at all? Thinking of things like the Korean War Memorial and the Vietnam Memorial that are complex emotionally, and they're not sort of this like jingoist, like rah-rah kind of war memorial. That's kind of what comes to my mind when I think of commemoration, or like the Ground Zero monument in New York, which I haven't been to, but I guess, does anyone have anything else to say on that?
I feel like when it comes to this conversation of wanting to hold on to people beyond their set time frame on this earth, it's important to take into account what exactly are we holding close to our hearts when we see this piece of art in memory of these people. I also bring to attention the almost instinctual gravitation towards people that we idolize and we now hold to such a high degree of almost like godly, like, you know, they cannot make a mistake. They must represent all values that are set to be well for all of humanity. Very little room for mistake, where majority of the time these people do not sign up to be looked at from such a grand degree of perspective. And when it comes to memorializing people, we have to be careful in recognizing and tokenizing the contributions that this vessel has taken form to then benefit the greater humanity. And so being very precise and cautious with the ability to shift and make themselves worthy of name or worthy of recognition in their action is, I think, something worth mentioning.
I think I don't think there's an issue around commemoration. I think it's the way it's been defined in the outcomes. I think, you know, as a concept, it's important, but it's how we express that. How do we reflect that in new ways that sort of depart from the sort of conformist ways that we've been bound to do that in the past. So, you know, I think it's such a complex, you know, it's such a complex place that everything is up for grabs. It's about how we talk about it and how we reflect that and how we communicate that to a broader community for feedback and opportunities to contribute to a greater understanding.
And certainly, you know, the word commemorative is subjective, depending upon who's using it.
Absolutely.
I was going to say, I also think it's really important to think about the power structures that are at play in terms of who has the agency and the resources to create the monuments. Most of the Confederate monuments that were built in the United States were installed in the 30s and 40s, which was at the height of the Jim Crow era. And I think that thinking about the context of these types of statues are really important as well, right? So in addition to what Marjan was saying about these like godly figures and forms, we also need to think about the power play that is in the existing monuments.
We have to also be ready, it seems, for when the society changes. I mean, much as we want to build them and to commemorate, who knows if the society will want to commemorate that much later on. I think about the monuments that have been defaced or taken down. I mean, no one would have imagined that. So we must be ready for that shift in public opinion, which is wild to watch. The people, like I'm thinking about the monument to Robert E. Lee that's taken on a whole new look now in Richmond. So will that be the new monument?
Well, let me just offer an opinion on that. And this is just strictly my opinion. Okay, this country went to war against Great Britain, and we beat Great Britain, which is why we celebrate the 4th of July. And there are plenty of Americans in this country of British descent whose ancestors fought in that war. And perhaps, they want to honor their ancestors, but they're not out here building statues of King George III and flying the Union Jack. The loser does not get to build his or her monuments and fly their flags on the winner's land. In 1941, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. We went to war against Japan. We beat Japan. There are plenty of Americans of Japanese descent, Japanese Americans. They don't go out here and build statues to Emperor Hirohito and fly the Japanese flag. In World War II, we went to war against Germany. There are plenty of German Americans in this country whose ancestors were in the Third Reich and fought under Adolf Hitler because they had to, unless they escaped to Poland or something. We don't go out here, these German Americans don't go out here and build statues to Joseph Goebbels or Adolf Hitler and fly swastikas unless they are neo-Nazis or something. So again, the loser does not get to build their statues on the winner's land. I don't think the statues that we have here, such as the Robert E. Lee and all these other ones, I don't think they should be defaced or ripped down and torn up. I think they should be taken down and put perhaps in a museum or a Confederate memorial park where people can go and honor them if that's what they want to do, because they are a part of our history, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the shameful. And we should not omit any of our history. We all have to learn from it, all the good things, all the bad things, all the ugly, and all the shameful things. We don't want to erase it. But the fact of the matter is the Confederacy lost the war. They need to get over it, and their statues need to go.
I think that's a great note to end on, actually. Absolutely. It's so stunning to see these monuments fall into the water in Baltimore and the projections of our lost brothers and sisters, George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and everybody on the monument in Richmond. I mean, the answer can be just that maybe the community gets to decide and speak. Thank you all so much. This has been really wonderful. And we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. I want to remind you, get your tickets for Monuments. It's gorgeous. It's meditative. It is soothing. If you are like me and tracking election news very closely, you want to soak in the faces, the trees, the work, and the good work of the people represented. Thank you, Marjan. Thank you, Ada. Thank you, Daryl, Brian, Craig. Good night.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Yeah, thank you. This has been a great conversation. Good night.